We're going to talk about learning pathways and how we built the solution. My name is Derek Cash-Peterson. I'm a principal architect at Praxis Consulting. As Vesa mentioned, our team worked with Microsoft to build this solution, and I personally have been helping to maintain this solution for several years now. So with that said, I know I was just here a couple of weeks ago talking about sort of the use cases for learning pathways, but there's always new folks on the call, so I'm going to do a quick intro into what learning pathways is. So it is a customizable learning platform from Microsoft and the MVP community. It is essentially a micro-learning platform. Its ability to provide small, little bite-sized chunks of training to your end users. It can also be used as a custom learning platform. So if you have custom content in your organization about your business process, you can use it to help surface that information, as well as information about Microsoft tools and products and tools. It lets you blend that content together into customized playlists. So you can, choose what to show from the Copilot content and mix that in with your own guidance around those different tools. There's a couple of different features to Microsoft 365 learning pathways, and we'll see them in a little more detail here. But the first is it comes with a web part that lets you embed learning pathways on any single page that you want in your Microsoft 365 ecosystem. We can also add this as a Teams tab. So you can add it inside of your department team to provide training for specific departments. You can also use it as a personal app inside of Teams. And this is all using the same amount of code. It's just how we're surfacing it in different tools. There is support for 10 different languages: English, German, French, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Brazilian, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and Dutch. I think that's all of them. But that's both not only UI, like the application has been translated into these 10 different languages, but also all of the Microsoft supported content is supported in those 10 languages as well. And we have the ability to create custom content through SharePoint pages or external URLs. Or if you wanted to really dive in deep, you could create your own custom content pack for your organization and not use any of the Microsoft related content. And lastly, there is a custom analytics webhook on that tool as well. So you can see what your users are doing with the content that you're providing to them. So you can actually use that to generate metrics around that content. So let's take a quick look at learning pathways in action. This is the site created through the site template, and it comes provisioned with a bunch of different pages on it. But we're going to click on the M365 training page, and this is going to bring the web part up onto the page. This is configured to show all of the options that we have here. So we've got different scenarios, we've got all the different product information, and then some adoption tools. And this is just what comes out of the box. This is what we've provided to the community as part of the tool. If you click in, you get to see all the different playlists that are related to that. So this is the Copilot playlist. We click into the Getting Started, and you can see here we've got an asset called Welcome to the M365 Copilot app. You can navigate to the next item in the playlist, either sequentially or from the drop-down in the center. We also have the ability to open this up in a larger full screen view. So if the content space that you've given it is too small, users can open it up into the full screen. And this is a dialog that overlays the screen. And so now we just go back to the home page. So this is just a very quick walkthrough for folks that haven't seen this before. But today's conversation, I'm going to focus more on how we built this, what the architecture looks like, so that you have a better understanding of the details behind the solution. So here we're going to start with the architecture. We start with what I call the Content CDN Lite. Essentially, we're using GitHub pages to surface up a series of JSON files that help with the configuration of the application and the delivery of all the content. Inside of that, we've got several different versions. We are on version 4 of the content schema, and so we have all the backwards compatible schemas for version 1, 2, and 3. They all look just like this. There's a file called JSON, playlist.json, assets.json, and metadata.json, and those things help control what content gets seen by the application. With V4, we introduced all that multilingual capability, and so because of that, things changed a lot. And so inside, and if you navigate to the repo, you can actually see all this yourself. There's a full manifest file, manifest.json, and that controls a bunch of very high-level metadata about the application. So we're talking, what is the current version? What is the default CDN? What are the languages we support? So like meta-based information. Then each language that we support has its own folder inside that documentation structure, and it's all based on the language codes for that language. So for the English language, we support en-us. For Spanish, it's es-es. And each language has its own set of files because all the content, as I said, is translated into those different languages. So here we've got our playlists.json file, our assets.json file, and these control the number and the playlists that are displayed and the assets that are displayed. So if we look at this detail, here we've got an example of one of our playlists from the playlist.json file. It obviously has a title and a description. As I just said, it gets translated to all the different languages. And inside of that, we've got our assets. These are GUIDs that are attached to individual assets inside the assets.json file. So here's an example of how that connection gets made. Now, if we look in more detail at the asset itself, you can see that that asset has a title. It does have a description, but we're not displaying that in any of the UI right now. So we have it in the data model. We're just not necessarily using it. We also have a status indicator here, and that is for an upcoming enhancement that I am working on to let you know when content has been retired. So for instance, we have a bunch of content in there that's related to Yammer, and we're not obviously showing Yammer content anymore, but I can't delete it in case somebody's using it. So I want to provide a visual indicator that lets folks know that content's been retired. Now, the real meat of this is the URL. This is the content that physically gets surfaced in the app. As part of that, we've got a couple of different components here. The first is the special endpoint that allows us to pull any content through and allow it to be iframed. So we pull all the Microsoft-related content from support.microsoft.com. We are able to use what they call the F1 endpoint, and this is the URL to that endpoint. We also have the unique ID of the asset on support.microsoft.com. So when you click on it, you'll see if you just went into the web browser to the same asset, to the same piece of learning, you would see a GUID in the URL. And so that GUID is what we use to help identify the asset that we want to pull out. And lastly, we have a few query string parameters. This helps us control and make sure that the navigation doesn't show up and we don't have sort of embedded multiple nav items in there. And it hides a bunch of content inside the page so that we just surface the content area. So this URL and this combinations of patterns here let us use just about any piece of data on support.microsoft.com. The next step here is really where the content sources come from. All of these locations come from either support.microsoft.com, learn.microsoft.com, or docs.microsoft.com. One of the two, one of the three. So those are the links that are made inside the assets file. Now, there's an entire whole set of componentry that live inside your tenant. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So the first part is the SharePoint Framework solution, right? This is the SPFx file. This tool was written using the SharePoint Framework. You install it into either a tenant app catalog or a site collection app catalog. In addition, we also have a Teams manifest as part of the solution. That's what lets you enable the Learning Pathways web part inside either a Teams tab or a personal app. We have a few tenant app properties, and these get set during the installation process, depending on how you're installing the solution. And you can just see, it's about providing the URL to the learning site, what the default CDN is, and where if you do decide to turn on the analytics webhook, what's the what URL do you need to send the request to? The biggest component really is the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways site. This is where all the information lives. We've got the admin web part, we've got the viewer web part, and then we have a bunch of web-specific lists that are specific to your tenant. These are any custom assets that you've created, any custom playlist that you've created. They all go into those lists, and then that generates a cache. And then that cache gets stored because you can imagine trying to sift through all this data real time. We needed to implement some caching. And lastly, if you want to use the Learning Pathways web part in other sites in your tenant, like say you want to embed it on your communication site for HR, you can do that. You just need to install the web part in that particular SharePoint site. And just to be clear, everything that I am talking about right here, the custom data, the web part properties, all of that stays and lives in your tenant. That data is not transmitted to anyone unless you turn telemetry on. Telemetry is one of the properties that you can submit. And at the end of the day, it actually doesn't submit anything other than your tenant ID and the ID of the asset that you hit. So there's no identifying information. It's really just your tenant ID. And that is the telemetry is opt-in. By default, it is turned off. So if you bring all that back together, you can start to see how between the content sources, getting the reference data in the CDN, pulling in the data from the content sources and surfacing all that information inside your tenant. All right, so if we start looking at the user experience of it all, you can start to get a hit of what is there. So here, this is the viewer web part, and this is embedded here on a SharePoint page. You can configure this viewer web part to basically filter down and show everything or show one specific asset. It's really got a bunch of different toggles for you to make that happen and to surface it in the way that's going to make sense for you. When you click in to a specific topic, so this is a category, a subcategory for Copilot. So these are all of the assets related to Copilot. These are all the playlists related to Copilot. You can click into a specific playlist to get more information about that topic. So this one, let's get started with SharePoint agents. This is the same JSON that we were looking at when we were looking at the architecture. When you click into it, you can see here again as the viewer web part showing a different set of data. You can see here we're in the get started with SharePoint agents playlist through the navigation breadcrumbs. And then we also have a search box, and you can choose to show or hide that search box based on configuration of the web part. The search box will actually let end users search all the assets and give them the opportunity, like if they want to specifically find something about Excel, or pivot tables, they can type in pivot and they'll find all of the assets related to pivot tables. Users inside of a playlist have the ability to jump back and forth using the next or previous buttons to navigate through the set of content that you provided to them. The content, and this is that data from the sources, gets surfaced in front, in the center of the screen. Just the content, not any of the navigation and anything like that. And as I showed in the first video, you can come in and you can expand this to full screen. When you do that, it just does an overlay and takes over the whole screen. You've still got the same functionality in terms of forward, next, and then jumping back and forth inside the dropdown. And then that's an overlay, so you can close it and the user is still in context of where it is that they are. Now, if we go back to the sort of homepage for the site, there is a link to the administration site. There's an entire admin component to all of this. The first, and this is an example of the screen for the administration. We've got our categories. These are on the left-hand side. These are the top level categories that you can see. These are not editable unless you create a custom content pack. So we've got getting started, scenarios, products, and adoption tools. Generally, when I work with this, for my clients, I fit different subcategories inside of, say, scenarios or in getting started. Now, underneath every category, we have our subcategories. They're listed both in the navigation on the left, and if you click on, say, getting started, you'll see them all in the center pane of the web part. We have the ability inside of each subcategory to show or hide that content based on the preferences for our organization. So for instance, if I want to turn off, I haven't rolled out Copilot for the organization yet, and I want to turn off the ability to see the training around Copilot, I can do that. Or I say Copilot, we don't want to turn off Copilot. You can turn off any other tool that you're not using. We can also create our own new subcategories. So here I could create HR learning paths, or training for procedure training. You could do all of that as well, and you can create custom content bases. And you can check out the video I did 2 weeks ago about how you can create your own custom content in Learning Pathways. Now, from an installation perspective, for those of us that remember the lookbook fondly, we have the site template that was related to the lookbook. You need to now, if you want to do that, and that's the site template that I was showing before, you can essentially create a learning site collection all on your own in the user interface. And then you need to download and install the P&P site template. And then install that using PowerShell. It's basically downloading it and running 1 or 2 lines of PowerShell, and you can get the entire template installed. If you don't want to do that, if you want to just create your own site and install Learning Pathways into it, we have an option for you to do that as well. You can download and install the solution, the SPFx file, and then you need to create your Learning Pathways site. And then we've created a PowerShell script to do all the installation work that the site template is doing as well. Now, the big difference between the two is that if you install with the site template, it provisions all of the pages. So all of those pages that you saw in the previous screens, it configures the web part on those pages. It also installs content in all 10 languages. If you do a manual installation without the site template, then you're on your own. You need to create the pages that you want to provide to your end users. So it really depends on what you want your scenario to be. A couple of notes on the installation. Because we're using those tenant app properties, you do need to be a SharePoint admin and a site collection admin on the learning site that you create. That will allow the PowerShell to run with enough privileges to set that to set those tenant properties. If you don't have those privileges, you could get them temporarily, do the installation, and then have them taken away, or you can get someone that has those roles to be able to do the installation for you. And lastly, on installation, be very careful about the default languages for the sites or languages in general. Because as I said before, if you install with the site template, it installs all 10 languages. Now, if your organization is a single language, you want to make sure that you want to install them because the web part's doing work. It's managing the cache for all of those 10 languages. The other thing to think about is if your organization's first language or language of business is not English, make sure that the default language for your site is set to your default language for business before you do the installation. And the reason for that is that in the event that you add custom content, you'll need to create there's a requirement that there be a title and a description for the default language. So if your primary language is French, you don't want to have to create content in English just to use learning pathways. So set the default language to French, and then the default information will need to be in French. So for multilingual folks or folks whose primary language is not English, just be aware. Now, from a technical perspective, how did we do this? This is a SharePoint Framework solution. For the client-side coding, we're using React. We're using the SharePoint Framework. We used version 1.19. That's the last version where we did a big update. We upgraded it to PNP.js for all the data and working with the REST APIs to version 4.2. And you'll notice all the nice UI elements. We're using the H2O React library version 2.5. Now, H2O is an HTML and CSS based Fluent UI framework for Microsoft 365. It is pure HTML and CSS, and so that's why we chose to use that instead of the Fluent UI React controls. And so there is a React library, a set of controls that you can use, but H2O in and of itself is just HTML and CSS, and I use that for all of my projects. And then for the installation aspect, we have a series of PowerShell scripts that you can use to do the installation. Now, I've got like 1 minute left. Vesa made an announcement earlier. We have some big news around learning pathways. So Microsoft helped to provide support financially for learning pathways to do the initial build, as well as being responsible for all the content updates. Now, learning pathways, as of, I think technically officially December 1st, learning pathways is 100% community supported, which means that any one of you could make a request for any new content that you want to see. Previously, we had to rely on the Microsoft team to sort of go through the requests and provide what they could provide when they had the resources to do so. But now we're hoping we can respond better to quicker, to community needs and have quicker content updates and better response time to the community. So how can you get involved? This is super exciting. You can submit a content request. You can ask for any content that more or less that comes from support.microsoft.com. You can also ask a question. If you know about learning pathways, you can go into the repository. If you have a question, you can answer it. Chances are I am going to be the person that answers it for you. If you see a piece of functionality that you think would be cool, make a feature request. I will review that and try to determine whether or not it makes sense in our product roadmap. If you're a power user of this tool and you feel ambitious, go ahead and answer questions in the repository. I look at them and double check them anyway. So if you feel like you've got something to share, you can share that through the repository. And I've talked about this a bunch, but this is the URL to the repository, github.com/pnp/custom-learning-office-365. And you can get to that either from here or from the PNP website.